Here we go, ladies and gentlemen, Lee Lawrence.
Thank you. A lot of familiar faces here. I wasn't planning on this, but I realized on the way here that 5 years ago, January 30th, so it would be a week ago, 1 week and 5 years, my wife wanted me to introduce me to some friends in this area who, when I was moving here from Pennsylvania, with like minds. So she had a birthday dinner and invited Larry, and that's when I met Larry. Unfortunately, his wife couldn't make it, so that was the same night I met Ben, who was his date that night. So anyway, we are really lucky to have someone like Larry in this area. It's very seldom someone with the MD, the credentials, the research, the details of the anatomy and physiology actually ventures over into looking at medicine from a different perspective. And Larry's been doing that for many years. He was instrumental in Duke Integrative Medicine actually forming many years ago. Larry's also a radiologist, practicing radiologist, so I guess you can't get much more into the anatomy and physiology of the physical body than that. So without further taking away from Larry's time, the show's yours.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Testing to see if these are on. Is that on now? Okay, good. Okay. Well, Lee, thank you so much, and thanks to Ben Perry back there who's running one of the cameras. And thanks to all the SFF folks for inviting me. I was here in 2007 and did EFT for Abundance and Health, which was a lot of fun. And I got to be at the Psychic Fair back in June, and that's where I met Vinny. And that was a great place to, actually that's the most EFTs that I've ever done in 1 2-hour period. That was exciting. So let me go back here. And thanks, Tom, for the water, too. See if I can get the...
Turn the thing around in your hand.
It was working a second ago.
No?
There it is.
You got it.
So yes, as Lee mentioned, I am an MD and started out as a real conventional radiologist and sort of went out to the far side of holistic healing, and that's what the book is generally about, that journey. And now I'm a certified energy health practitioner through the Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology group. And so I do EFT and hypnosis. I'm also trained in acupuncture, although I don't do much acupuncture now. I practice at Oriental Health Solutions, which is with Dagmar, my wife, Ken Moorhead, and Fong Tsai. And I just do the EFT and hypnosis there. I let them handle the acupuncture and everything else. And I'm going to take you on a little journey today into my exploration of symptoms as metaphors and how I came to understand that I think every illness tells a story. And if we can pay attention to the story that our body's telling us, we can have a lot more opportunities to heal. I'll just take you briefly through the... There we go. Just to cover the book, is a little bit of a story in itself, in that it's a Lakota medicine wheel. It starts in the east with the yellow color. And I put an MRI scanner there because that's where I began my journey. My first metaphysical book was about the Great Pyramid in Egypt, so I put that in the south, which is for initiation and youth. And then in the west is Death and Rebirth, and the Jaguar came to me in a shamanic journey when I first got to Duke. Then my dad died around that time, and then I started having angel encounters, and that completes the cycle in the north. Then the magical buffaloes running around the outside are inspired by my 2 trips the last 2 summers to the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota to teach EFT to the Lakotas, which is another whole interesting story in itself. The white buffalo down here happens to live about an hour from my hometown in Pittsburgh, outside of Pittsburgh. And its name is Watch Over Us. And the pine needles down here are symbolizing the Pine Ridge Reservation. Norm Shealy wrote the foreword for the book, and Alyssa Hinton, who's a famous Native American artist in Durham, did the cover with me, which was a lot of fun. And for those of you who went to my Rhine talk back in September, I spent the whole hour basically talking about the cover of the book, which was a lot of fun. In the appendix of the book, there are 10 self-healing mind-body-spirit techniques. We're going to focus on 2 today, the symptom as metaphor, and we'll throw in a little EFT as well. I'm going to spend the first half just doing PowerPoint slides to take you through this little journey, and then we're going to spend the whole second half doing experiential exercises, questions and answers, and I hope to get you to tell some of your own stories as well. So that should be a lot of fun. Good. Okay, so this all started for me in '87 with a crud ball of frustration. My dad had been healthy his entire life until age 57, and he used to gesture to his abdomen and be very frustrated with his job, saying he's building up a crud ball of frustration, which people familiar with transactional analysis, I'm okay, you're okay, that was one of the catchphrases that they used. And he would gesture to his lower abdomen when he was doing that. He'd been passed over for vice president in his job, and he kept a bullshit file on his computer, which I didn't find out until later. He seemed to be pissed off about his job. And what happened was one day he came home and peed blood, which was a physical manifestation of being really pissed at his job, and then wound up having this CAT scan, which has a huge renal carcinoma. And this is not his CAT scan, but it's as close as I could find on the internet. There's a normal kidney on the right side, and this large cancer, which is actually smaller than his cancer was. It was about the size of a small grapefruit. And when he would gesture to his abdomen, that's where he would point. And so I started thinking that, boy, is that possible that he could be manifesting something he was talking about for that many years and building it up inside of him? I'd never even considered that before in my whole radiology training in medical school. That was a foreign concept to me. So that was the first sort of aha moment. And it was reinforced by reading Bernie Siegel's book shortly after that, which came out the same year, actually. And there's a story about that in the book. Bernie Siegel was one of the first doctors to step out and say, we have some role in creating our own illnesses, co-creating them, or however you like to spin that whole story. Unfortunately for Bernie Siegel, it did have the ramifications of sometimes generating New Age guilt, where people started feeling guilty about creating their own disease, and then when they found out they couldn't uncreate it, they felt like they were doing their visualizations wrong or some other fault, and they were blaming themselves. My dad actually had that full experience later in his journey, with his 7 years with that cancer. Shortly after finding Bernie Siegel, I found this lady, who I'm sure you're all familiar with, Louise Hay, in a little metaphysical bookstore I was going to every week, and found the Heal Your Body book, which I called a little blue book. And the subtitle is The Mental Causes for Physical Illness and the Metaphysical Way to Overcome Them. And it's a pretty amazing little encyclopedic journey through every symptom you can imagine. Let me just see a show of hands how many people actually have this book and have used it. Okay, I'm more than half the audience, 2/3. And it's my first impression of it was that it was way too oversimplified, and this couldn't possibly be this easy to correlate a symptom with a belief. And that was my initial reaction. However, when I looked up my dad's situation, looked up kidney problems, it said criticism, disappointment, failure, cancer, deep hurt, long-standing resentment, deep secret or grief eating away at self, carrying hatred. Those all seemed to fit with his story, and I was intrigued by that. Now, these are sort of non-specific statements. You could apply them to a lot of different things, but it resonated on a deep level with what he was experiencing. So I started thinking, well, maybe I'll use this book for myself. So I kept it on the shelf, and it was there for a couple months. When I woke up, I'm actually going to go through 5 of my experiences using the book. The first was I had a lower leg cramp, a Charlie horse like you wouldn't believe. It was lasting 5 minutes or longer. And I'm thinking, when is this going to end? I finally crawl over to the bookshelf and pull the book off the shelf. and looked up lower leg, and it says, not wanting to move, also fear of moving forward. I thought, okay, what's going on here? I was closing on my first house the next day. And so I realized, I clicked, like, whoa, maybe that's what's going on. And as soon as I realized that and said the affirmations in the book, pretty much went away. And I bought the house the next day and everything was fine. But that got my attention. So I realized, oh, maybe there's something real about this. A couple of months later, I had the first time in my life a wicked case of hemorrhoids. I'm thinking, oh, what's this about? I look it up in the book. You know, fear of deadlines. And I had a huge radiology deadline a week later, turning in a big paper I was working on. And I did some affirmations. They got a little better. When I turned the paper in, it went away. It never came back. It was like, dang, I'm thinking, this has promising potential here. So if it works for hemorrhoids and leg cramps, who knows what else it might work for. And then the most interesting experience I had with it was with postnasal drip. And this was a real puzzle to me as it was unfolding. My dad and I went out to movie theater to see a movie on a Sunday night. It was kind of a little cold and windy in the theater, like it sometimes is. And I felt like I got a perverse wind invasion, which is the Chinese medicine term for a virus coming in. You know, so I got a scratchy throat when I got home. And so I did all the things that we do in Chinese medicine to handle that. I had hot ginger tea, took a hot bath, sweated it out. You're attempting to sweat out the perverse wind. And took some echinacea, did some acupuncture. I was fine when I went to bed. I woke up the next morning, felt good, had a good day. But that night, I had just a tiny bit of postnasal drip down the back of my throat. I'm thinking, that's annoying. But then when I tried to go to sleep, I coughed. And I kept coughing and coughing all night long. And it wouldn't go away. And I finally went down in the basement to give my wife some peace. And so I spent the night down there, got up. I still felt okay. The next day, I didn't have a cold. And I managed to make it through the day, and then attempt to go to bed again. Same thing happens. A little bit of annoying postnasal drip, and it's just coughing. Oh, and by the way, the first night I had looked it up in the book, and it said, inner crying. I said, nah, it's not me. I just put it back on the shelf. I did a lot of EFT on annoying cough, postnasal drip, sort of physical things. I couldn't really come up with any emotional connection to it, so I really wasn't getting anywhere. So the second night, same thing. I get no sleep. Third night, I'm getting pretty desperate because my resistance is breaking down. And I'm thinking, I can't make it through another night here. It's coughing. It's like 2 in the morning. I'm coughing so hard I think I broke a rib. I have acute chest pain down in the basement. And I finally start tapping what we call emphatic EFTs, where you start screaming and tapping. And I was swearing with I have no idea why I have this cough. I was getting to the point of surrender, so I was really desperate. So I was just letting go. And I've had a flashback to the movie we watched, which I wasn't expecting. I was really letting go, and I had no idea why I had it. And sometimes when you get desperate in EFT, you really need to surrender it. So the movie comes back, and in my mind, it was Richard Gere and Jennifer Lopez in Shall We Dance. Has anybody seen that movie? Okay, well, I don't want to give away the movie plot, but the gist of it is he's a middle-aged guy going through a midlife crisis, takes ballroom dancing lessons, and doesn't tell his wife and daughter, and is like going to surprise him with it once he's in the show. So, the daughter in the movie could see right through his whole facade, and it reminded me of my daughters. And I had been divorced a couple years before. I wasn't seeing much of my daughters as much as I was used to, and I realized I missed my girls. So I started to cry. And when you cry and tap, it works just as well as screaming and tapping. And I actually combined both in the same night. And I wound up crying, tapping for about a half an hour, got up and sent them both emails in the middle of the night, and it was gone. No more postnasal drip, no more coughing, slept the rest of the night, woke up the next day, felt fine. I don't think I've had postnasal drip more than once again in my whole life. So it was that symbolism of that whole thing, especially the fact that I picked the book up, looked at it, and denied it. That was what really made it powerful for me. I thought, oh, dang. And of course I was saying, well, it's just a generalization. The inner crying, that's not me. And of course it was me. So, now, the face came up right as I was editing the book. And I sort of did some bibliotherapy as I was writing about all my trials and tribulations being at Duke in the belly of the beast, and realized that I was actually putting the first draft of the manuscript had a fair amount of anger in it, and as I was editing it through, I actually developed a basal cell cancer here and on the back of my neck. Had those both removed with the Mohs surgery, which is pretty aggressive surgery, and then in the post-op period, I developed another lesion right here on the side of my cheek, and it looked not like a basal cell; it looked like a melanoma. It was really scary looking, brown, ragged edges, and came up really quickly. And I thought, I wasn't there preoperatively. I don't know where that came from. And I started putting iodine on it, which is one thing I've done for precancerous lesions, is just put over-the-counter iodine. If you put enough on it, sometimes the precancerous things will flake off and just go away. And I was putting it on, and I was praying, I was tapping. I scheduled an appointment to go back to the surgeon to have a biopsy. And then I realized, what does this mean? And then I looked it up in the book and it says, what we show to the world. So the book that I'm putting out, I said, it's got to take all the negative vibrations and all the low-frequency emotions out of the book before I publish it. So I edited it out and tapped and prayed and put iodine on it, and it started to flake off 2 days before the biopsy. And the morning of the biopsy, I woke up and it flaked off and fell off completely, and there was nothing but normal skin under it. So it was like, oh yeah, that worked. It was a big relief. Then the shoulder is probably my most important metaphor, because I've had shoulder pain for 20 plus years, and it took me years after having I had arthroscopic surgery back when I was actually helping to develop MRI of the shoulder back in the 80s. Of course, I knew just enough to be dangerous to myself and to talk one of my orthopedic surgeon friends into operating on me. And of course, I got no relief and wound up dealing with this for the next 15 years until I finally figured out, my shoulder pain is connected to anger. And I learned how to release that with using EFT and other techniques. But even with those skills in 2006, even after treating patients with frozen shoulder for a while, I started developing a frozen shoulder in 2006, and it was scary. I don't know if people are familiar with it, but basically you have no major trauma to begin with. One day your shoulder just starts to hurt, and it gets worse and worse to the point where you can't move it, and most women cannot, the cardinal sign is you cannot unbutton your bra strap. I didn't have that to check, but I couldn't get my hand above my waist, and I knew I was in trouble. And then it goes from there usually to becoming, the pain eventually goes away, and you just are left with massive stiffness. You cannot move your shoulder more than like this. And you can't comb your hair, can't do anything you ordinarily would do. And I knew I was headed down that path, and it usually takes sometimes 1 to 3 years to resolve. And sometimes it never gets fully better. And I knew what was coming. I said, this is not good. And I needed to pull out all the stops I could think of, every mind, body, spirit trick I knew. So I did acupuncture, EFT, massage, chiropractic. I was doing everything. And then I finally went to Donna Gulick to do a spiritual healing, past life regression session. And I knew what was going on and what was triggering the shoulder. It was in the heart of the Bush presidency, and I was a political activist at the time. I was very angry, and it was coming on, and I felt like there was nothing I could do about it because I was so angry. And I realized, okay, anger is not really working for me here. And Donna did a past life regression. She goes, okay, I see 2 lives in the Middle Ages where you had righteous anger against unjust authority figures, and you were stoned and poisoned. Do you want to do that again? Okay, I get it. So I finally started really doing some serious EFT and screaming and letting go and really surrendering. And my shoulder got better in 2 to 3 months instead of 2 to 3 years. And there are other factors involved in that, which I'll let you read about in the book. But it was an experience in really understanding in a deep way what the metaphor for shoulder problems are. And so I got really interested, even more interested in frozen shoulder than I already was. You can go way back to 1934 and look up. Codman is one of the old classic shoulder surgeons. And he said, he coined the term frozen shoulder to describe glenohumeral stiffness and pain, saying it was difficult to define, difficult to treat, and difficult to explain from the point of view of pathology. That should be a clue to you that you're dealing with a symbolic disease. There's a big metaphor going on here, and Western medicine, symbolic diseases, they can also be considered invisible diseases, because your doctor just can't see them. He hasn't been trained to look that way, he hasn't been trained to listen to your story that way, and they're just going to be confused like the smartest surgeons on the planet. And the other term you'll hear a lot is idiopathic. That means the Western medical definition, which is the diagnosis, which is usually just a Latin word describing what the symptoms are. It doesn't really tell you what it is. And then if it's idiopathic, that's even worse. And if it's autoimmune, that means they really don't know what it is. So that's kind of where we are, unfortunately, at this point. Navaiser then in 1945 said it's a chronic, he's describing it. It's a chronic inflammatory process involving the capsule of the shoulder, causing a thickening and contracture of this structure, which secondarily becomes adherent to the humeral head. So you're just first the synovium is angry, red, and inflamed, and then it just becomes fibrotic and sclerosed. It takes years to go away. And then here, now this guy was a little closer to being on the mark. Coventry summarizes his description as actually being a periarthritic personality, which according to a psychotherapist in Rome is a result of poised indecisiveness, an inability to express tension freely. The patient then becomes hung up on dead center in a state of disuse. So what you have is someone who is so angry, but they can so not express it. So what are they going to do? Well, you're going to freeze your shoulder. And it's the most powerful psychosomatic disease I know. It goes beyond the typical psychosomatic disease, which sometimes in medicine are called functional diseases, like irritable bowel syndrome. If you do a barium enema on someone with irritable bowel syndrome, you don't see anything abnormal. But if you do an MRI scan on someone with frozen shoulder, it's very abnormal. So you're actually seeing a physical manifestation of the anger in the shoulder on the MRI scan. And you see the same thing when you go in and do the arthroscopy. Here's a normal MRI scan of the shoulder, which is just a sagittal scan through here. The fat is normal fat around the shoulder. The muscles are gray. And the biceps tendon is right here with this arrow pointing to it. And there's supposed to be just fat in between here and the coracoid process. And this next slide is of someone with frozen shoulder. And here we see that the biceps tendon is here between those two arrows. And there's this big intermediate signal intensity glob of synovium, which is inflamed. And when you give gadolinium contrast, which is the agent that enhances through the bloodstream places that are inflamed, the entire shoulder, all around the shoulder, gets white. And that should not happen. So it's totally inflamed. So when you can actually see a psychosomatic disease on an MRI scan, it really gets my attention. So it's one of the more meaningful diseases that I know. Now, my acupuncture mentor, Michael Greenwood, in Victoria, British Columbia, did an unusual kind of acupuncture where you hyperventilate with the needles in and go into an altered state of consciousness. He calls it the void. Well, he had a frozen shoulder patient. During an acupuncture bodywork session, the patient entered the void and spent several minutes violently hitting a pillow with her injured arm. Later, she revealed that she would imagine punishing her abusive ex-husband. After emerging from the altered state, the patient was astonished to realize she'd been using the purported frozen shoulder. So she must have been in a fairly early stage of it where she was releasing some of the anger during the session. And that was my first real recognition that the frozen shoulder might have this symbolic concept to it. And Michael also goes on, he wrote many good books, and his website I think I have coming up in a minute, but he talked about something called psychosomatic compartmentalization, which also came from Upledger and the craniosacral therapists as well. He defines it as the real root of a disease is chi and blood stagnation, which occurs usually due to an emotional block. And there's filtering and diversion of unacceptable energies into the Jungian shadow. So this is where there's some part of yourself that you can't address. You have to deny how angry you are for whatever reason, and put it into what he describes as an energetic dump site. I like that. So containment and dissociation of diverted emotions in an energetic dump site, which causes regional pain and numbness. And what he described as psychic or somatic cysts. They're energetic blockages that a good clairvoyant can probably see. Now, this is actually one of my patients at Duke Sports Medicine when I was doing acupuncture. So in a pretty left-brained clinic, I had a lady come in who was actually a health professional. She was desperate because she was getting a frozen shoulder. They sent her to physical therapy. They sent her home, said, "We're hurting you. We're not doing anything for you. Just go home." It's like, your shoulder's not moving. It's painful. Come back in a couple of years and we'll do physical therapy with you. And she had no relief from an injection into the joint. Physical therapy was terrible, and she got taking non-steroidals. The one she was taking was Dextra, and she got a side effect, which was constipation, so she quit taking it. And she didn't know what to do. So we did a few acupuncture sessions just to get started, and I asked her, which Michael Greenman told me to do, is ask her what happened the week before the frozen shoulder started. So there's usually some inciting trauma that triggers the whole process. Well, her best friend had just, she's a friend for years, had just moved and left and didn't say goodbye and no explanation whatsoever. Just imagine that happening to you and where you would feel that in your body. Well, she got really upset and angry in her shoulder, and it just froze. And it kept going and going and going. I saw her weeks later. Well, we did some EFT, and we did acupuncture, and using Michael Greenwood's method, had her go into an altered state of consciousness and start to release some of the energy that was stuck there. And it was very interesting. It was the day when I had medical students in the clinic with me. And it did a couple of weeks of work with her, and then one day it just started happening. She was hyperventilating just gradually, and she started to shake. And her arm was just shaking uncontrollably, very subtly. You could barely see it. The medical students had no clue what was going on. I kind of pointed out, there's a major healing event going on right now, and they're like, well, her fingers are just barely wiggling. I said, just watch. And when she got to the table, she could move her shoulder. And I still think the medical students couldn't really understand what they were seeing because that's outside their paradigm. So that was a real, and this happened before I got my frozen shoulder. So I'd already worked with her. I knew what was going on by the time I got mine. So this brings up another conversation about addressing your story versus taking medications to suppress your story. So the symptoms are coming with a message, and you can either shoot the messenger or you can listen to them. And the side effects of shooting the messenger are generally not good. And that's actually graphically illustrated in this slide from Journal of the American Medical Association way back in '98. There's a whole lot of figures here, but 30 years of 39 studies of complications of taking prescription medicine. And this excludes errors that doctors made, excludes people not taking the proper medicine or overdosing or drug abuse or anything else. And they looked at the serious adverse drug reactions. 7% of the people they looked at had, major, so over 2 million a year. This is estimated for 1 year. But over 100,000 people die per year from what's written on the little sheet that comes with your drug. It says you can have bleeding, you can have this, you can have that. And so when you may not realize when you get that form that it lists stuff on there, and they really happen. And even though they run through the end of the ad very quickly through all those side effects, they can kill you. And so the price we pay for wanting to suppress the messenger is people die. And a lot of people die. And our society has made the decision, sort of cost-benefit analysis, that suppressing our symptoms is so important that we're going to have 100,000 people die a year, and that's okay. Because we've decided that as a culture. And of course, the evening news triggers anybody with any somatic problem to begin with. You watch the evening news, and whatever you've got is going to flare up. And there's a dozen drug company ads sponsoring the evening news. So just go figure. Now, this is Michael Greenwood's famous teaching story. His website is paradoxpublishing.com. But he says you take your new sports car out that you're really excited about, and you're zooming around, and the red oil light comes on. And you go, oh, that's not good. And you look it up in the owner's manual, and it says, do not drive the vehicle with the warning light on. Even for one block, it may ruin the engine. So you turn the ignition on and off, hoping it's just an electrical glitch. Still on, so you have a tow to the drugstore, sorry, to the car mechanic. That was Freudian. Okay, so, and then you...
Nice shot.
and so the mechanic comes out and says, "Oh, I know this car very well. I'm very familiar with the electrical system. I can handle this." Takes it back in the shop and he cuts the wire that goes to the red light. And he gives you your car back, and everyone's gasping. And it's like, okay, that doesn't sound good for our car. Why is it okay with every drug that we take that that's exactly what's happening? The last signal that goes to create the symptom wants to be interrupted by the drug so that you don't have to hear the message behind it. So that's an amazing metaphor. And if that sounds like automotive malpractice, hello. So now the bigger question is, how big does the signal have to get? This is a great Calvin and Hobbes cartoon, which just shows him sneaking up on his dad and blowing up the bag. And then finally, when his dad is ignoring him, he finally pops the bag and he's like, "Pay attention to me." Well, that's really what your body's attempting to do with any symptom you have. It's a message coming. It's like, hello, there's something out of balance in your life. Your emotions are out of whack. They're stuck in your body. Pay attention to me. And that's really all that they're asking. So you're looking for connectedness. Physical problems usually have emotional components. Resolve the emotional issues, and often the physical symptom is decreased or eliminated. And the key is persistence, really. If you got a symptom that's there and it's persisting, you need to persist in figuring out what it's about. And if there were an emotional reason why this doesn't heal, what would it be? And Ann Adams is the PowerPoint queen of EFT, so these are actually one of her slides. So. I'm going to move on to Carolyn Mace. How many people read Carolyn Mace? I'm sure it's the whole audience here. Okay, so she had one great quote about biography becoming your biology in Anatomy of the Spirit. And she clarifies this a little bit. The idea that biography becomes biology implies that we participate to some degree in the creation of illness, like Bernie Siegel said years before. We must not abuse this truth by blaming ourselves or any patients for becoming ill. Illnesses develop as a consequence of behavioral patterns and attitudes that we do not realize are biologically toxic until they've already become so. So we all participate in this process, but a lot of it is largely unconscious, and we don't really know what's going on until it hits us with a 2x4. And so this is her antidote to the New Age guilt concept. Now, Gabor Mate is a physician who I just met 2 years ago at the Toronto Energy Psychology Conference, and he is a brilliant guy. He's really unassuming looking. He was a family doctor for 20 years, worked in palliative care up in Vancouver, British Columbia. This book, When the Body Says No, Understanding the Stress-Disease Connection, has a lot of really symbolic work in the book that's very useful, and I've been reading it for the last 6 months. When we have been prevented from learning how to say no, our bodies may end up saying it for us. That's the genesis of the title of the book. And essentially he's saying that people with a lot of childhood trauma who never learned how to say no in a dysfunctional family situation often go through their lives never saying no. And eventually their body says it for them. And he has examples in his book of autoimmune disease and all kinds of dramatic diseases that have the foundation in early childhood trauma. And he even cites the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Effects Study from the CDC, which is really, if you just Google ACE, CD, and then CDC, it'll pop up automatically. And it without going into it in great detail, 50% of the population have had 0 or 1 adverse childhood events. That means, this is a survey of 17,000 people in the Kaiser Permanente system. That means that 0 childhood events means your parents didn't get divorced, pretty much. 1 childhood event, your parents got divorced. 2 adverse childhood events, your parents got divorced and they beat each other. 3, they beat each other and they beat you. And then 4 and beyond is where it gets, the cumulative trauma gets so large that the 12% of people with over 4 account for many of the chronic diseases, addictions, and all of the dysfunction that people cope with in our society. And so what Gabor Mate is really saying is, if you want to avoid chronic illness and you have a lot of adverse childhood events, you need to learn how to let your body not say no for you. You need to start saying no for yourself. And that's the central message of his book. And it's He also focuses on a lot of celebrity diseases. He analyzes their biographies. And the one person he really keys in on is Lou Gehrig. And I'll just summarize the Lou Gehrig story briefly, because it's very familiar to all of us, except the details I wasn't even familiar with. He did play 2,130 ball games in a row. Never missed a single game, was called the Iron Horse. But what I didn't know was that the reason he never missed a game was he was too dutiful to his fans and employers to ever miss a game, and they documented 17 different fractures in his hands that he played through, wincing when the ball hit the bat, and just played because he would never miss a game. He couldn't let anyone down. So he could never say no to playing. However, when a Yankee rookie became sick, he took him home to sleep in his bed and be cared for by his mother, and he actually lived with his mother until his 30s when he got married. So he was the ultimate mother's boy, and very nice to everyone. Finally, his body said no when he got amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which everybody knows is Lou Gehrig's disease, but it actually stands for no muscle nourishment. There's no nourishment going to your muscles, it's going to everyone else, and your body just finally shuts down. And the fascinating story, he cites an article from the Cleveland Clinic where they have the technologists in the EMG labs, the electromyography labs, which test your function of your nerves and your muscles. And they do all the scores for the people with ALS, and they have a big clinic. But the texts also make notes at the bottom as to what their impression of the patient was, aside from the objective data. And they invariably will write, let's see, this person came in and being evaluated for ALS, not nice enough to be an ALS patient. And it turned out they were always right. They just knew if you saw someone who was extremely nice, beyond nice, bending over backwards to please everyone, that was their prototype ALS patient. So it's a fascinating story. Yeah. And ultimate perfectionist, overachiever, just driven by this internal need never to say no. And he's a brilliant chapter on this. Now the other person who I've discovered recently, and this is all in the last couple months since the book came out, I didn't get to put either one of these guys in the book. Brian Broom is a clinical immunologist in Auckland, New Zealand, who actually found so much psychosomatic disease in his allergy immunology practice that he went back and became a psychiatrist. Because he realized that if he was going to help these people heal, he needed to have other skills. So he now runs a mind-body program in Auckland and has trained over 50 clinicians how to think symbolically in interviewing their patients. And he actually looked at 500 of the patients in his practice and found that fully a quarter of them had frank somatic metaphors. In other words, their story is written all over their body. It's like so obvious if you look for it. It's like screaming at you. And he makes many great examples in his paper.